This is possibly the easiest presentation I'm ever going to give. Essentially, we just want to talk to you for the next 45 minutes, mainly around how technology, media, and creativity are really coming together. Around sort of 1 o'clock, there was a session around programmatic buying. And they were really talking about the delivery mechanisms and the delivery mechanics. But also, we just want to add another component to that and really sort of understand what is the net impact of advertising. And essentially, if we are just having a math conversation around programmatic delivery, we're actually missing the people component and the psychology component. And to really just sort of echo and reiterate this, when you actually look back to the 1960s, you start to sort of look at the 4 Ps of marketing, which really also were the guiding principles in terms of how do we go about what we do. In the late 70s, early 80s, 2 people, Boom and Bittner, added another 3, one of which, as you can ultimately see, is people. On the plane over here, and it took sort of 7 hours to sort of get here, I asked a few friends in terms of what other Ps of marketing did they really focus on or stay, what sort of kept them up. And essentially, you can start to actually see that there's a barrage. Sit at the front, James, it's fine. But there is actually a barrage of Ps. Now, I would be the first one to admit that all of these, they are not necessarily the quintessential Ps of marketing. But what they are distractions. And so when you actually break some of these down, you actually start to sort of see that there is an imbalance between the technology and the delivery mechanisms and the core net value of what we are really trying to achieve. I'd also say that all of these people coming into the room are making me feel a lot better. Oh, really? Oh, okay. You haven't missed much. Yep, it's fine. I'm only on slide 3. But to surmise for the people that are coming into the room or have just gone into the room, essentially what we're really sort of talking about is understanding how the psychology, and to that degree, we're really going to talk about neuro, how that's really coming together with programmatic delivery, and that's beginning to allow us to fully understand the net impact of advertising. When we start to talk about the sort of focus on people and psychology, I just really wanted to sort of show you how the brain actually works. And this is a live example, if it actually is going to be a live example. It's not. I think it might work on a click. No? So actually what you start to sort of see is that the brain changes and it adapts to different information and different stimulus. The big conversation here, and one of the myths, is that the brain effectively stores information almost like a set of library books. And therefore, advertising and branding has its own section of the brain. And we know that actually that's not true. The brain isn't actually as organized as we like to think it would be. And actually, we store elements of branding in a number of different areas. So essentially, in order to be able to recall, there's some seats at the front as well, but in order to be able to recall branding, we actually have to create tangible links between all of the individual brand components. Now, why is that really important when we start to look at this in terms of programmatic and psychology, or technology and psychology coming together? Well, fundamentally, a lot has really been made of viewability. A 3-second Facebook ad versus a 30-second TV ad. Are they even really comparable? The question we should really ask ourselves is, how do we actually remember creative in the first place? Or how do we remember areas of the brain? And the brain operates far more like a camera than it does a video recorder. So it remembers moments of advertising. It doesn't remember chunks of time. So it doesn't matter if you're running a 2-minute or a 90-second or a 30-second or a 3-second. The brain is going to remember components of that rather than necessarily all of those messages. Now, Damasio, who is a famous neuroscientist, he talks about brand tags, the importance of ensuring that your brand has distinctive assets. Anyone who has read How Brands Grow by Professor Byron Sharp will really start to sort of understand. He talks about distinctive brand assets. And a lot of this is really derived, whether that be color, tone, celebrity. Those distinctive assets are what people really recall. And when you bring that together with the notion that we don't store information in our brain in a highly organized way, actually those distinctive assets become exceptionally important to how we're going to recall advertising. So if we know that brand tags are important, one of the fundamental elements that we then need to take into account is that time, whether this be across 3 seconds or 30 seconds, it doesn't hold the same value. We don't hold the same level of attention across the entire ecosystem of advertising. And in fact, what we end up doing is we end up snacking on little moments of advertising and bringing them together in our own right. Now, the reality behind it, and a lot of people have knocked technology and knocked programmatic delivery. The reality behind it, it's the machine can only learn what we allow it to learn. And if we're not factoring this into any of the algorithms that we're actually putting forward, then we're not actually understanding the net impact of the activity that we're putting in front of people. So marketing would like to assume that everything is linear, so time is very linear. It has equal measure and equal value, and it's very, very distinctive. The reality behind it is actually we operate in a world where people view everything as tags, and the lines are slightly blurry. Bill Bernbach, who's a famous creative director, talks about how people remember advertising in a misty form. We kind of recall some of the assets, but we can't recall everything that there ultimately is. So I'm sure a lot of you have seen this chart, because when viewability was sort of one of the hot topics, everyone was talking about a Facebook 3-second view, and could it possibly carry the same value as a 30-second TV ad? And that's actually a really good debate to have. But it's also only part of the debate, because it is a math equation that people want you to sort of talk about. It is a 30-second versus a 3. There is a net value differential between those two time zones. And a lot of it has really, our industry has almost started to like revolt against itself. You have your traditionalists on the one side that believe a 30-second TV ad is far more impactful. And then you have on the other side, you have a digital ecosystem that we're actually sort of saying, well, who said that 30 seconds was the right time frame in the first place? Now, actually, we know our attention span has gone from 12 to 9 to 6 seconds on average across the world. So essentially, when you start to plug that into advertising, you can start to see, and we're going to show you, using the neurotechnology, we're going to show you how difficult it is to keep people's attention for as short as 15 seconds. We go all the way up to 90 seconds, I think we do. And in that 90 seconds, people are switching off all the time. So the reality behind it, time does not hold the same value. And actually, even within a 3-second exposure through social channels, the net value of that is not the same ad by ad. So when you actually bring the terminology together, and the reason why we've sort of broken these out is that they actually are really symbiotic. They work really well together. We actually have artificial intelligence, machine learning. The machine can only learn from what we actually tell the machine to learn in the first place. So if we're not actually taking into account the psychology of how advertising is working in there, then actually we're actually having a math debate rather than necessarily an impact and an experience debate of where advertising sits. So I'm going to hand over to Pete. We've been working together for about 5 years using steady-state typography to create a suite and a bank of learnings in terms of what is the average response to advertising. You can break this down by category. You can start breaking this down by timeline. We actually can start to understand the net impact of core brand assets and core brand tags, and how they really sort of help us in understanding the impact of advertising.
I guess by now the burning question is, and Dave's done a great job at sort of setting this up, is the burning question must be, how can we possibly bring psychology to the technology? How can we quantify the experience or the people part of the equation to the exposure? You know, the experience and then the exposure. I think what Dave is saying very articulately is that if we let technology run off with the game, it's a maths equation. And what we'd like to do is basically share a proposal with you today, and that is that we actually can gain a huge deal of insight from the field of neuroscience, where we can actually quantify the psychology part of the equation, where we can actually quantify the experience and bring that back into some sort of equilibrium, I guess is what we're saying. Why would you want to do that? Is because we believe there's huge competitive advantage in knowing, not necessarily, if you're gazing at exposure, you're gazing at what you actually buy. If we can bring this into balance, we're now starting to look at what you're getting, not just what you're buying, the real value of your communications investment. So please join with us as we basically look and unpack a few examples that we've been working on in the last 5 years and show you what we mean. What you're looking at there is time series data. So I'll set this up a little bit and then we'll have some fun and we'll play some ads and some videos and you'll see this play out in the flesh. On the vertical y-axis, if you like, is basically the strength of the most important measure that we have, which is memory encoding. Essentially, memory encoding, what you're looking at there is a typical 30-second ad. And if I can be a little cheeky and plagiarise this man over here, that is a measure of subconscious and conscious storage of experiences, whether it's a TV commercial, whether it's an experience, whether it's a streamed device. What you're looking at there, the higher up that y-axis, 0 to 1, the stronger that moment is stored into memory, if you like. It's actually not a survey, it's not my opinion, it's not a focus group. It's an objective measure of what is being committed to memory. So that's a typical 30-second ad. It's about 14.5 million data points. It's a 30-second ad. If that ad was in the Super Bowl, it would cost you $4 million. And we're going to look at a few Super Bowl ads and pull them apart. But what you can now start to see, if you look at the x-axis across the horizon, is time, a 30-second ad. And this is exactly what Dave's been saying. You can now see that not all moments are made equal, and that some are far more equal than others. And this is how the brain stores memories. It's actually not like a videotape. And I know that we all like to think that we've made a beautiful 60-second piece of creative and the consumer out there is going to basically store that as a video. It actually, unfortunately, is not the case. The brain stores snapshots, as Dave was saying. Quanta is what it's called. And those peaks, those hills, are those packets of information being stored. So the big question here is, as Dave was saying about brand tags, about distinctive brand assets. What we're going to look at are some case studies of where those assets live. Do they occur at the high points of memory encoding, or do they occur at the low points of memory encoding? In fact, what you're looking at there is that famous saying, great ad, but I can't remember who it's for. The reason behind that is because the great ad are the peaks of memory. The point in which you declare it's for your brand may have been in a low point. So this is the importance of time, precious, precious moments of time as your narrative, as your storytelling plays out. And this essentially is what we believe the psychology part of the equation can come and start to rebalance it. So Airbnb in the Super Bowl only a few months ago basically had a campaign about We Accept. Now this is huge brand territory. Social inclusion, extremely topical at the point in time, particularly with the Trump factor and what's going on in the US and in fact all around the world. So an Airbnb ad and the narrative is about We Accept. The point is here is that keep an eye out for this bottom right-hand corner, which is memory encoding. I'm going to apologise now. We're going to jump into the deep end. We're going to show you all the data that Neuro can provide this equation. In the middle area, you've got time series data on engagement and emotional intensity, and the top right-hand corner, you've got approach withdraw, a green line that will give you above the horizon approach, below the horizon withdraw. Have a look at it, but please keep out your eye on memory encoding and particularly at the point of branding, and we'll see what this is telling us. Could we play, please? Oops. Could we play? So a great, stirring, very, very topical piece of territory, the brand territory about social inclusion. If Airbnb owned that territory, that brand territory of social inclusion, that would have been a successful ad. If it didn't, and it was only relying on that last second, in the bottom right there you can see, relying on brand, the obvious part of branding alone, was a higher risk strategy. Now that's fine. That could have worked very, very successfully for Airbnb, but brands take a long, long time to build that ownership and the license to talk about, in that case, social inclusion. What you're about to see here is another 30-second ad in the Super Bowl for Intel. On the other hand, a great example of a brand that's invested many, many years and arguably tens, hundreds of millions of dollars in owning a sound signature. So take a look at about the 25-second mark when that iconic sound signature comes in, a distinctive brand asset, and see how powerful it is to get branding to peak. Thank you.
Intel 360 Replay makes anything look epic. Literally anything. Wait till you see it in the game.
Enough. They get it.
So that magic chime in half a second more than doubled the effectiveness of that ad. Again, what we've actually looked at over many, many studies globally is that the strength of memory encoding at branding or a brand tag or a distinctive brand asset is the single strongest point of correlation to future consumer behaviour change. Not necessarily the whole ad, but the strength of memory at a branded moment. And that's why branded assets and tags are just so important to get right. The question is, what can a brand tag or a distinctive asset do to propel your ad, or B, indeed, how can it take advantage of a peak once the narrative has got you there? So that's what we're looking at. Okay, we've seen plenty of examples of big brands. Again, this is a Super Bowl ad. A themed ad in the Super Bowl, you'll see how well that works. But the use of talent and personality. And the question here is, who's the actual beneficiary of this piece of communication? Is it Justin Bieber or is it T-Mobile? Thank you.
Hello, I'm Justin Bieber, celebration expert. First, there was the high five. And then there was this. Grunk! From the spike, it evolved quickly. We got the shimmy, we got the shake, and the shimmy, shimmy, shake. Then there was T.O., who took it to the next level. That guy's got unlimited moves. And today, everyone wants things unlimited. Nice moves, kid.
I'm not done yet.
Say goodbye to limits. Introducing T-Mobile One. All unlimited, all in. Taxes and fees included.
Everyone loves unlimited. Post your moves now, and I'm gonna share my faves. Where did this guy come from? Look at him dance. Unlimited moves. This guy's got the shimmity sham sham shimmity shake right there.
Wow. So you saw that peak at about the 37-second mark, that tight shot of Justin Bieber on the pause. You could argue that Bieber did better out of that than, say, T-Mobile. That's okay. That pattern there is actually called conceptual closure, and the lesson out of this that we work with optimization of creative is when it comes to the cell, cutting a story or a narrative in half means that the ad has to work incredibly hard to fight its way back up through the cell. So, of course, the challenge, and this is not easy, is to integrate the brand, the cell, and distinctive assets all the way through to ensure that you have high levels of memory at the moments that count. So, an interesting ad, talent versus brand. In fact, we would argue that the only distinctive asset that worked for T-Mobile there was the colour pink at that peak at about 52 seconds. Again, $8 million worth of airtime in the Super Bowl there. Here's one that I actually argued and debated with Dave quite a lot. It's a 90-second ad and it's for Australia. And I'm sorry to be a little patriotic about it all, but I said, look, I really want to respect the audience's time. We've only got a limited amount of time to show these case studies. I don't think 90 seconds is going to cut it here today. And Dave said, you should play it. That's exactly the point we want to make. And I said, well, hang on, 90 seconds is 90 seconds. The point is that you will see how fragile engagement and memory is over a long period of time. And if it's that fragile, as you're about to see, this just emphasises the importance of key moments and using distinctive assets that Australia has, like the Sydney Harbour Bridge and the Opera House, like open outdoor scenes, like beaches, freedom, and kangaroos. So, and what you might see is that right at the very end, we have australia.com, the URL, which must have high levels of memory. So it's also a case of how a distinctive asset can set key moments up to be effective. Please enjoy. Thank you.
How can the colour blue be a feeling? Well, it's hard to describe, but it is. You see, it's different down here. The air just has more life in it. Sounds touch you, and the light fills you up somehow. Yeah, it's a place that stays with you. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it stays forever. That's why there's nothing like it.
It's like love, cleanse your soul, feel it in your veins, breathe it in, your lungs will stay. It's like love, for the first time, it'll all make sense. You know it.
Australia isn't just a place you see, it's a place you feel.
It's a great example that if you're into creating ads for tourism, how your product can be the narrative, or how the narrative can be your product, and successfully woven in. But you can see how we really become very respectful of time moments in time and how brand assets can drive a moment. Now, we're not just picking a point out at random. A peak occurs as a function of the whole story, but it is the peak that is really, really important. Okay, on the other hand, we're getting a bit patriotic here. I promise you this is the last cheesy Australian ad we're going to play, but please bear with us. Yellowtail wines, plenty of kangaroo, plenty of yellow, and unashamedly plastered branding all the way through. But this can still work. Thanks, guys.
This is a kangaroo. If you see a road at a party, it's a good party. Because at Yellowtail, we believe in fun. We believe if your wine needs to breathe, you should take it outside for some fresh air. We believe in Ellie Gonzalez. Hi.
Hey.
Want to pet my roo?
Sure, I'll pet you.
And finally, we believe in this. That's Yellowtail.
So yeah, yellow, kangaroos, plenty of product in there. That's the last cheesy Australian ad we'll play, I promise you. Apart from this one. But culture can make a big difference as well.
So the other component that you may be sort of thinking about, well, what is the impact of culture in terms of receptivity to advertising? And we're just going to show you a 15-second example. There are, I think we tested in total about 14, and we started to identify core themes. Now, one of the core themes that you're going to see as we sort of play through this, that actually if there are language proficiency challenges, what you start to find is that people then start to respond to other elements of the ad. And actually, you'll start to sort of see the receptivity of the cultural groups that we tested in Australia. They responded far better to music. In fact, there was one ad that we tested, and we didn't put it in because of the time, which was a Toyota ad that lasted 90 seconds that had actually 0 words in it, and it was all music. And we actually started to sort of see really similar patterns in how, when you remove language from an ad, how people actually start to look at other sort of triggers. So could we play this one, please?
I'm living in that no one man should have all that power. The clock's ticking, I just count the
The next example, this ad pretty much divided the creative world of Australia. And the main reason being is because it actually has all of the core brand tags you could possibly imagine. Now, Coles is one of the major supermarket chains in Australia. And at the time, they were using the band Status Quo. They had some gigantic red hands. They had the terminology down, down, prices are down. And so essentially, what you start to sort of see is a net engagement score throughout the ad, but also because the brand tags are consistent, actually what you start to get is a brand that was highly recalled, not just, and this is probably a point we should have made earlier, this is not just about ad recall. Now, ad recall is actually technically a myth. You need to look for brand recall. It's not necessarily if people remember your advertising, it's whether they remember the brand that's associated with the advert, because that is the moment that actually everything gets in. You'll see why it divided the creative world as we play it now.
Delicious Coles brand sliced ham in a handy 400-gram 4-pack, just $5 every day.
Every day?
Every day.
Every day.
Just $5 every day.
I'm not honey ham. Every day at Coles.
There are so many, we've actually published the cultural work that we've done on WARC, so you can actually sort of go and have a look at it. There are loads of similarities in terms of the importance of sound. The acceptability of price among cultural groups was far greater than amongst sort of Western Australian groups. You know, again, like what we can then start to sort of look at is, well, what other factors really do we need to take into account? Like we've actually shown you a number of big TV ads. Well, actually, you can then start to look at the subtle nuances between channel delivery in terms of what is the difference between TV versus mobile delivery. How does that change, whether that's delivered via your social stream, whether that's delivered in online video? We're starting to collate all of these learnings as we sort of move forward. We can even start to collate the frequency and when we start to actually see the declining brand tag and brand equity. So what does all of this really mean? Essentially, we've spoken about programmatic advertising, and we've spoken about that in isolation. It's been to date, it's really been a technology and math conversation. And essentially, we can start to talk about algorithmic bias is something that a lot of people are really talking about. Actually, if we're sort of teaching the algorithm the wrong inputs, then ultimately, is it actually optimizing as efficiently and effectively as we can? But also, there are cognitive biases. So time is not linear as a 30-second ad. There are distinct highs and there are distinct lows within that period of time. And essentially, if you have your distinctive brand tags at a point of a high, you will actually get brand recall far greater than if you ultimately don't. And the next sort of area for us is to really start to beta test this as we actually then start to put this into programmatic delivery. And actually, as we start to factor in the psychology into the sort of delivery, because we really need to sort of get beyond exposure metrics. Essentially, exposure metrics allow us to score the net impact of media, because we tend to actually start with media and advertising at the core. Whereas actually, if you flip that, and you know, a lot of the sort of core terminology of human-based planning and design-based thinking, that really puts people at the forefront. And I know that some of you may have missed one of the first sort of couple of slides. Actually, we started to really talk about how the new technology world, which is surrounded by 30 or 40 different P's of marketing, we cannot forget that we're actually advertising to people. And we cannot actually forget that we should be looking at the net impact of what advertising delivers rather than just the exposure metrics. So because we can actually count something, that doesn't mean that we should count it. We only should count the things that count. And this is the work that we ultimately, you know, we're moving towards. And we'll leave you with one final thought, mainly because it's a conference and we like to try and create buzzwords and we like to try and create all of these other things. A lot of conversation has been around how technology is driving short-termism and how we're always fighting for the next big thing now. Actually, when you're bringing psychology and technology together, that doesn't mean that you have to stargaze 4 or 5 years into the future. It ultimately just means that we need to actually look beyond today. So real time is actually okay. But essentially, we need to make sure that we've actually got the right algorithms in place that allows us to optimize it. So we just really want to sort of talk about, like, actually, there is a world where midtermism can actually exist, where technology and psychology can come together so we can actually start to count the things that really matter to us as an industry. Thank you.
Do we have time for questions, or?
Do we have time for questions, or no?
No.
No? Okay. No questions? There you go. We've spoken. It's been spoken.